should be on. There we go. All right. Early in the 1944, nearly 200 men inside of Hitler's regime concocted a plan to assassinate Hitler. This was simply one of 42 known attempts to assassinate him. These attempts included a broad range of tactics, including things like poisoning his food, handing him poisoned letters, many attempts trying to shoot him, using TNT set by the roadside to explode. One of his leaders concocted using a series of his tanks to surround his parade at one point, time bomb planted on his plane, a suicide vest, even a landmine. All of these were plans that were devised to try to kill Hitler, mostly by his own people, his own men, but sometimes from outsiders as well. On July 20th, Klaus von Stauffenberg, he was the point man in an operation known as Operation Valkyrie. He was tasked with placing a bomb in a suitcase in a briefing room at the Wolf's Lair where Hitler would be. All went according to plan. He planted the bomb in the room. He excused himself to go take a phone call, and the bomb detonated just according to plan. How it did not kill Hitler, no one knows. It killed 4 other men in the room, but only partially, just kind of barely wounding Hitler. Stauffenberg, his plan was to, immediately after the bomb blast went off, to head to Berlin and to enact part 2 of the coup to take over the city. But by the time he reached there, he realized that Hitler was not dead. And one of his co-conspirators betrayed him, and he was shot that night. So in a single day, the whole plan fell apart. Over the next several weeks, the other 200 conspirators were rounded up and executed quite brutally. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, when you strike at the king, you must kill him. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 3 this morning. This tale from Valkyrie, there's a movie as well that popularized that story. It kind of elicits this idea of no one wants to be the Daniel. No one wants to be the person, the bagman, if you will, because we're worried exactly what happened to him will happen to us. As we went through the work series in the last several months, many of the stories that I opened with were people in the corporate world who tried to stand up against some kind of injustice, immorality, illegality, and some who were successful, some who were part of the problem, some who oftentimes were fired or in some way punished. And so this is kind of a fear that is very deep inside all of us. And I think Daniel, in the book of Daniel, goes through a lot of these. And so first, Daniel's going to set up the story for us. Chapter 3, starting in verse 1, it says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth was 60 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justice, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justice, the magistrates, and all of the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." Therefore, as soon as all of the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. This scene sets up the drama for this entire chapter, that they are out here on this flat plain that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up some kind of statue to be worshiped, and now it's sort of a do or die situation of, in front of everybody, you either have to bow down and worship a God that you don't believe in, or you have to defy the king and his order. Deuteronomy 28, Moses is speaking to the people and he's warning them, when you walk away from God and God leads you into exile, these are some of the things you should be afraid of. Deuteronomy 28:64 says, "And the Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone." which neither you nor your fathers have known. And among these nations you shall find no respite, and there shall be no resting place for the sole of your foot. But the Lord will give you there a trembling heart and failing eyes and a languishing soul. Your life shall hang in doubt before you. Night and day you shall be in dread, and you shall have no assurance of your life. In the morning you shall say, if only it were evening. And in the evening you shall say, if only it were morning, because of the dread that your heart shall feel and the sights that your eyes shall see. I believe this is one of those events maybe that Moses had envisioned that would be happening to the people when they went into exile, that they would be forced into these scenarios where they are forced to make these dramatic choices. The challenges through the book of Daniel, we're in chapter 3, the challenges have become increasingly public and increasingly more risky. In chapter 1, it was a fairly private discussion. Daniel and his friends decided amongst themselves. They had a quiet conversation, essentially with their direct supervisor, and said, hey, on the down low, can we try this experiment? The stakes were really low. The audience was very, very private. They tried the experiment. It worked. It went well. They were honored and promoted. Chapter 2, it's a little bit more public, but it's still just in the department, so to speak. It's all of the magicians and the astrologers and the fortune tellers and basically Nebuchadnezzar's cabinet, if you will. And it's a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. It's not public on a public stage, but neither is it the quiet group that it was before of just Daniel and his friends and their supervisor. Now it's the entire group. And the stakes were raised as well. If you don't interpret the dream, bad things are going to happen. But now, this is on a public plane in front of everybody. Everybody's there. He names all of these different government offices. They're all there. It's in front of all of the nations. It names language and tribe and tongue. The stakes have changed. It's not entirely clear what this gold statue was. A lot of people think, well, maybe this was inspired by the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in the previous chapter where he represents, or the gold, head of gold represents him. He is the head of gold. And so maybe he set up a statue in his own image. This, on a simple level, might seem to make sense, but kings at this time are not known to present themselves as deities or to demand worship as such, and so it's not really likely. More likely, it's probably Marduk, a statue of Marduk. Marduk is the chief Babylonian god, or Nebuchadnezzar has his name in honor of Nabu. Nabu is the son of Marduk. And so Nebuchadnezzar's name is honoring him. So is Abednego's name honoring him as well. So when they changed his name to Abednego, this was to honor Nabu. So it doesn't really matter which it was because it's a statue. The Jews are told don't worship statues. They got into the exile for worshiping idols, amongst other things. And here they are again. There's some kind of God, and they're being told you're going to fall down and worship, or else. Daniel 3:4 says, the herald proclaimed aloud, you're commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages. This indicates that this crowd is quite diverse. The Babylonian Empire spanned across the Middle East. It spanned into Iran, into Turkey, into Egypt, into Central Asia. It was expansive at the time. I talked quite a bit in the introduction sermon about the number of words from different cultures that were borrowed and how people think, well, this shows that Daniel was written at a much later date than the Bible says it was written. And I said, no, this actually fits the story of the book of Daniel, that the Babylonian Empire at that time was quite expansive, and it would make sense that they would have these words. It would actually be more of a problem if there were no borrowed words. And so all of these musical instruments that are named, these are borrowed from the Greek. But this is a massive empire and a massive stage, and it's being put to everyone, worship or else. How are God's people supposed to live in this? What are they going to do? See, there's two major models for how do we as Christians live in a society. One is called the power over model. This is the model that Christians in America have been operating from for some time, and it's the model that's been falling apart in the last 20 years that has everyone panicked. The other model, though, is what I call the leaven model. So power over seeks to control, and the leaven model seeks to infiltrate. Power over seeks prominence. The leaven model hides in plain sight. The power over model seeks a majority, And the leaven model, it's a known minority, but it's a minority that transforms. When you think about leaven, you think about yeast that goes into bread. It looks like dust. You can literally you could blow it out of your hand. And yet, you put it into bread, and it transforms the loaf of bread into something entirely different. It is no longer the substance that it was before. It takes on an entirely new form because of this. In America, Christians, we've been operating in the power over model for too long, and without a strong understanding of the leaven model, as power is being lost, it leaves many people wondering what to do. God has a plan for us, I believe, but I also don't believe that plan is for us to be in power. This is an important thing for us to consider as we enter into more and more election years, and there's always that seditious notion of, hey, if we won an election, we could control things. And this is a method of the past. But as Christians move out of the majority population, out of a majority voting bloc in this country, we need to get focused back on what does the gospel say that we're supposed to do? Who are we supposed to be? And in the New Testament, Jesus uses words like we are leaven, we are salt, we are light. It uses all of these things which are tiny and infiltrate, but have a transformative power in the world. Next, we see that they go through 3 stages of persecution, starting in verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship before the golden image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylonia, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. There are certain Chaldeans. This is not all of the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans were some kind of group of astrologers or fortune tellers. Wise men is a name used in the New Testament for them. And they were likely jealous of these 4 exiles who had risen to power and prominence. Now, if we remember back a chapter, these 4 exiles saved them. Daniel in particular saved them. They were all about to be killed. And then Daniel, with his ability to interpret the dream, saves them from that death. And they've already forgotten this as they're out on this plain and they see an opportunity to seize power. It says they maliciously accused in my translations. A lot of translations say denounced. Literally, this expression is quite flowery. It means they ate the pieces of them. They gnawed them. Maybe a more apt expression in English would be chewed them out, though this doesn't quite get the drama of the word. They gnawed on them. They devoured them. They appealed to the king's pride. These men knew what the king was about. King, they pay no attention to you. They reject your gods. They're not obeying your commands. So they appeal to his pride in a way. This immediately has the effect that was intended. We see a confrontation between Nebuchadnezzar and these 3. It says, then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? The king's rage is strong. He immediately confronts them. Is it true? I've heard this. Is it true? Is this what you did? So the fact that the king does not know what's happened and it's 3 people out of a mass crowd standing when everyone else is bowing down shows you probably how large the crowd was, how big the stage was that this was happening. And in his generosity, in his kindness and graciousness, he says, look, I will give you a second chance. Maybe you weren't listening. Maybe you missed the moment. Maybe someone called your name from behind you and you looked the other way. Let's put this to the test. We'll have them play. We'll give you another chance. All can go back to normal if you'll just do what I say, if you'll just worship the gods. He threatens immediate punishment with this kind of taunt. Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Again, the story that Nebuchadnezzar has told, the narrative that the Babylonians are telling is Nebuchadnezzar is the great king of kings. He is going to conquer. He is going to come in and take captive what he wants to take captive. And no one can stop him because the Babylonian gods are behind him and they are the greatest gods. Let's put this to the test on the field of battle and see who wins. And the story, the narrative of the Empire of Babylon seemed to be holding this truth up. It seemed to be that this was true. Who are the gods who can oppose Nebuchadnezzar and his gods? The implied answer here, the assumed answer is, well, no one. I mean, look at his empire. His gods have clearly beat up everybody else's gods, so he must be number one. And here we see from this confrontation that not Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are the ones who answer back. In verse 16, it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. The hostages essentially are testifying to the king of who do they serve and what will he do? What standard has he called them to? Whether it's successful or unsuccessful, what are they supposed to be doing? Early Christian martyrs, oftentimes as they were being carted off to be burned, to be beheaded, fed to the lions, many things, they would preach their last sermon as they were being carted through the streets. And in response to this, the Romans and others began to cut their tongues out before this procession so that they could not preach one final sermon on their way to their death. Here we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego ready to testify to God and his power, even as it seemed like they were about to be killed. What's the difference between a random act of crime against someone who happens to be Christian and Christian persecution? If we don't understand this distinction, it's very easy for us to make a lot of confusions and kind of carry around a martyr's complex, which a lot of Christians have in today's world. I'd say it has to do with the question of why is the violence happening in the first place? A random act of violence against a Christian, I would say, is not persecution simply on the basis of it's a random act. It's not about who they are. It's not done because of their identity. It's not done because of their witness of Jesus. But violence becomes persecution when it's done for those reasons, because someone is a Christian, over their testimony, over their proclamation about him. This is the difference between those two. These three exiles, they reject an offer of a second chance, and they cut right to the chase. They go, look, we don't need to do this charade. The result's going to be the same. Guess what? We can't do this thing that you're asking. Obedience is not an option. We're not going to do it. One thing that we forget is we are already empowered to obey God. We don't have to wait for special permission. Think for a moment of an Old West movie. You have the bandits come into town and rough people up. And so the lone sheriff realizes, I have to stand up for the innocent people, for the helpless, but I can't do it alone. And so what does he do? He finds, you, and he deputizes them. He puts a badge on them, hands them a gun, and says, we're going to ride out after the bad guys. They all mount up and they ride out. Those men have been deputized. They've been given the authority. They've been given the obligation to follow through on behalf of the law, on behalf of justice, on behalf of the innocents. They're authorized. This doesn't mean they won't get shot at, though. Having that badge, sometimes it's a target, not a shield. We too are deputized by King Jesus to act in this world on his behalf. This has already happened. We don't need a special permission. We don't need a special calling. That calling has already been given. This doesn't mean we won't be shot at. This is part of what it means to share in Christ's sufferings. If the world hated him, they're going to hate us as well. But we are still called to act in the ways that Jesus acted. God is able to deliver. This is their message. But if not, we will not worship or serve your gods. They realized the possibilities. They had seen God allow them to suffer. They had seen the Babylonians come in and take them captive. They had seen their names be taken away, their identity, their futures be taken away, all by the Babylonians. And God seemed to do nothing other than allow it to happen. We're not going to do this. God can rescue us. But if he doesn't, I think that's a real thought in their mind of, this might really be the end. This might be the final time that we square off against the king. They had also seen God act on their behalf through the interpretation of the dream, through the health eating challenge where their wisdom was shown, but not their wisdom, God's wisdom. This is not the only place in the Bible where someone reaches this point of desperation that I have no other choice but to kind of lay it all on the line. Job lost everything in his life. Job chapter 13, verse 15, he says, though he slay me, I will hope for him. Yet I will argue my ways to his face. He has some very conflicted feelings going on. God is slaying me. He is the one allowing this to happen. All of my pain, this is not random. This is from God. It's fitting within his will. It's fitting within his goodness. Even though he is slaying me right now, though he is killing me, I will hope for him. He is my hope. He's my salvation. He also says, yet I'll argue my ways to his face. Look, I want to fight a little bit about it. I want to argue. I want to complain. That's okay. Acts 5:29 says, Peter and the apostles answered, we must obey God rather than men. This is when they had been taken in by the rulers and said, look, you can't go share the gospel. They don't need special permission to share the gospel. They don't need human permission to go share the gospel. They have already been deputized to go share the gospel. And they said, look, we're going to obey God rather than men. This is a demonstration of what Jesus says in Mark 13. Jesus says, but be on your guard, for they will deliver you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them. And the gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations. And when they bring you to trial to deliver you over, do not be anxious beforehand what you are to say, but say whatever is given you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. Jesus is aware that his followers are going to have a very similar experience happen to them. I keep asking every week, what are the elements of Daniel that we can expect God to act in the same way? And what are ways where we go, well, this is a special instance? And I would say there's a way in which Jesus is speaking, and New Testament writers bring in some of these ideas that should both make us optimistic and a little bit cautious, where it seems likely in Jesus' mind that some of us would be dragged before the authorities, that we would be accused, that we would be forced to give a reason. And he says, don't worry about it. It's okay. Don't be anxious. The Holy Spirit is going to speak through you. This is not just rebellion for the sake of rebellion. This is not the angry and rebellious but without a cause. It's theological. They're not rejecting the king. They're not rejecting the Babylonian Empire. They're not rejecting the laws. They're saying, look, there's a moral element that you've now pushed us a little too far, and this is where we say, we won't do it. Now, you ask the question, is this a bluff? Is this a negotiation tactic? No, it's not. It's not, because the king is saying, look, do this or I'm going to kill you. And he's clearly shown he has a very fast trigger finger. He is very ready to punish those who oppose him. The fact that they are willing to say, look, we're not bluffing. If you want to just kill us, go ahead and do it, because we're not going to obey. This is not also abject lawlessness. They're not just finding laws in the culture to break. We're commanded to live at peace with all people. We're commanded to not be taken in as a lawbreaker. 1 Peter 4:14 says, if you're insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, as a thief, as an evildoer, or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him be ashamed, but let them glorify God in that name. He's saying, look, there are two types of captivity. There's two types of incarceration. There's one that's because you did it. You broke the law, and you're just being punished according to the rules of the law, and that is right and just. But the other side is, what if it is not because you were a lawbreaker? What if it is because you were a Christian? What if it's because you make a stand in his name? And Peter says, you're blessed. I also find it funny that he adds that word meddler to that. Like, what culture and time and place was arresting meddlers? Because we could definitely use some of that today. The final phase of this is punishment. Verse 19 says, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated, and he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flames of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the fiery furnace. There's a level of detail here that Daniel is using, and I think it's because he wants you to know he's not speaking hyperbolically. This is not a metaphor. This is not a story that maybe happened or maybe didn't happen. There's a kind of level of detail that he's describing where Daniel wants you to know they were in the fire. The fire was deadly. It killed some people already before they even got into the fire. There's a lot of miracles in the Bible where the Bible tells us a little bit about how they happened. The crossing of the Red Sea. How did the ocean part, how did the sea part for them? Well, the text says God caused an east wind, a strong east wind, to blow, and that is what separated the waters. Okay, it's still a miracle just because we understand how God did it. God enacted another law of science to interact with other laws of nature as well. It doesn't make it less miraculous because he tells us how he did it. He still did it at a very timely time and place where it was beneficial to them. This one, we have no clue how any of this happened. But Daniel is insistent, it happened. The king's face changed, his countenance changed. He turns against them. He has the furnace heated. Now you think about this, you ask the question, well, what on earth is he just doing with this furnace lying around? Well, the fact that he's in conjunction with where the statue is, this is probably some kind of kiln that they use to melt down the infrastructure of the statue. It's gold, it's probably gold plated based on the size. But this is probably some kind of kiln that they had that they were using to build this statue with. But they heat it 7 times more. This is probably running somewhere in the 1,000-degree category. And he takes his mighty men, he takes his special forces, and these guys don't take anything off, which I don't know why they would, but Daniel's clear about they had all of their clothes on from head to toe, and these mighty men throw them into the fire, and they were killed in the process. The story we're about to read of them being saved out of the fire doesn't negate the fact that they went into the fire. Can you imagine that split second of fear? I mean, the whole time I'd be afraid, but like in the moment where you realize, oh, that was the final word. Oh, they're grabbing us. Oh, we feel ourselves falling towards the fire right now. Can you imagine that split second of fear before you know what God's about to do? It had to be terrifying. Verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. There's a 4th man in the fire. You just see the king's exclamation of, That was upsetting, but we dealt with it, and I'll just find some replacements. What's the big deal? We'll go conquer some more people, find some more wise young guys, and we'll start over. And then you just see him looking back at that moment of near satisfaction and going, wait a second, they're not dead yet. According to the king, he says, there's one like a son of God. Who is this person? I don't want to be dogmatic, maybe a little bit. I don't want to be overly dogmatic. The text does not say that this person is Jesus. This person is the second person of the Trinity. This person is the Son of God, right? It doesn't say that. But the king says that, right? The king says this is one like a son of God. He's saying this person has some kind of angelic countenance. We know of Jesus because of the human person that he was born into in the first century. But he has always existed. He was there in creation. He was there before creation. He will be there after the world ends. And so this is where Christian theology is. He is fully God and fully man. This is where there's both sides of his nature, that he was both parts. We see throughout the Old Testament, though, that there are these appearances, these little hints in the Old Testament. Abraham is sitting there in his tents. This is somewhere around Genesis chapter 18. And 3 visitors come to him, and 2 go into the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and 1 stays there. And at some point, it changes in the language of how it talks about that visitor, and it's clear, like this is God visiting Abraham. Joshua is preparing to go and attack a city, and he's standing there one night, and the angel of the Lord comes and speaks to him. And again, if you watch the language change, at some point it's the angel of the Lord, the angel said, the Lord said. The pronouns and the labels shift a little bit, where you realize this is not just any angel of the Lord, this is the Lord himself appearing to him. I would argue this is what we have right here, that he allowed them to go into the fire, but he was going to meet them there. God never promises to prevent us from hardship and tragedy. He doesn't promise us a happy life. If you've come to church today, or if you've come to Christ thinking, he's going to give me what I want, I'm going to serve him, I'm going to do A, B, and C, and he's going to give me X, Y, Z, and that's how this relationship works, you've bought a lie, because that's not what he promises in the scripture. Quite the opposite, actually. He promises that if we follow him, the world will hate us. But he promises to be with us. This is not just a one-time story where you go, well, you're making too much of the story. Isaiah 43:2, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. It's probably a reference back to the Exodus. And the rivers, probably a reference back to when they crossed the Jordan into the Holy Land. They shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flames shall not consume you. Sounds pretty direct. When you walk through these things, I will be with you, is his promise. Matthew 28:20, the Great Commission, this is where he deputized them. Verse 20, he says, teaching them to observe all I've commanded you, and behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. They might not have known why that was so important, but in the next generations, as the Romans decided, we better start killing these Christians to save our society. I imagine that became a lot more important. Paul in Romans 8:37 says, no, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. What did he not mention in that list? The past, the present, the future, everything. Hebrews 13:5, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have, for he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. The author of Hebrews strikes at one of our basic fears in life. How will I have enough? How will I keep food on the table? And he says, look, don't get wrapped up in that. That's not the main point. Because, and his reason of why is, Jesus says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. We know we don't have to worry about those things because Jesus is there. And so here we see where they are in the fire, they're in it, and Jesus is present with them. Do you wonder if they're sad when they get called out of the fire? I mean, we know Jesus, we've met Jesus in some way. This is why we believe in him, why we follow him, but like we haven't physically seen him. Can you imagine what it would be like in your moment of trial for this fourth man to just kind of show up and be there and fellowship with you. We often ask these questions: God, why did you let this happen to me? How could this happen? Why me? Why now? How long, O Lord? Like, these are the lines that we start our laments with, and it's okay to lament. If you're sad this morning, lament, write it down, call it out. But when we say, where are you, God? We look at this story and we say, God is right there with us. When we look to Jesus and we say, God, where are you in our times of suffering? Because God has taken on human flesh and been nailed to a cross and beaten and humiliated and murdered on our behalf, we can say with certainty, where is God in our time of trial? He's right there with us. We don't serve a God who cannot feel. We serve a God who has literally felt our pains. He's felt our emotions. He's felt embarrassment and shame. He's felt humiliation. The question is, does God always save? How far do we take the application of this story? We need to be careful, I would say. Hebrews 11, this is the chapter of faith, and it goes through a long list of Israel's heroes. In verse 33, there's a shift where he runs out of space to keep writing their stories, and he sort of just summarizes. And the first summary is the people who had great things happen to them. Verse 33, Hebrews 11, says, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lion, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Wow, that sounds great. Sign me up for that, right? That's the faith experience that I want to self-select. Stop the armies, quench the fire. Yeah, that sounds great. There's kind of a big but here in the middle. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. They were called to believe. They were called to a God who has an ultimate plan for the world. And they have so many examples of those times where there was the rescue from fire, where there was the rescue from death. And now here they are being the ones that are being cut in half, being committed to the fires, that are going about impoverished. Where is God? Where is the justice in this? We should always do what is right. We should always do what God has called us to do. But we also need to be willing to face the consequences. We need to be smart enough to realize that a tapestry is made of many colors. Some of those are bright colors. Some of those are dark colors. But the whole tapestry woven together makes a beautiful picture that someone had envisioned. We don't know what God has chosen for our life. We only know what he's called us to do. And by obedience, we get woven into this story of his. Sometimes it's bright and happy lives where everything goes right. Other times it's lives where there's dramatic problems. Verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar sees what has happened, and he starts praising God. He says, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, who sent his angel to deliver his servants who trusted in him. They yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship. Therefore, I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid to ruins. This guy just has a thing for tearing people limb to limb and plowing over their houses. Like, this is kind of his go-to threat. The hostages were missionaries, though. Verse 2, 3, 4, 7, and 29, there's this listing of nations and languages and peoples. Daniel wants you to know the stage was public. The stage was, for that time and place, it was global. God had brought all of these things together. He had allowed this whole event to happen. Why? To show who he was. It would not have happened had he prevented the fire in the first place. It would not have happened had somebody simply executed Nebuchadnezzar on his way to work one day. It only happened because he was allowed to rise to power. God allowed him. It only happened because he was allowed to conquer God's peoples. God allowed it. It only happened because he was allowed to throw them in the fire. God allowed it. But all of these things, all of the men in the government, all of the people out on the plain of Dura are witnessing this. There's the music, everybody bows down. We're like, great, we check that off. Let's go back to our day. Boss is happy. And then we hear, wait, there's a scuffle happening. Somebody didn't bow down. Wait, they're still refusing. Wait, they're being thrown in the fire. I mean, can you just imagine the headline from the crowd growing? You go, wait, the king just changed his tune. The king is now supporting these men. The king is now threatening anybody who threatens these people's God. This is a direct response to verse 15. Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Nebuchadnezzar's final word here is there's no other God who's able to rescue in this way. There's a side of mission work which is about presenting people with the gospel, which is focused on saving their souls from an eternity of punishment. That is certainly one side of the gospel. But there's another side of the gospel, and the gospel in the Old Testament is largely God demonstrating his deliverance for his people. God demonstrating that he is a promise-keeping, covenant-keeping deliverer. That he has steadfast love for his people. That he has a way of deliverance for those who come to him and turn to him. And these things are present right here. And that's why I'm saying they're missionaries. This is the Old Testament gospel essentially being played out in front of everyone. So what does this mean for us? I would say number one of our takeaways should be prepare yourself in private for what God's work is in public. Who you are in private should inform who you are in public. The growing publicity and the challenges, the heightened threats, none of these things are accidental in the book of Daniel. God was growing them. He was giving them a little test of, hey, as a group of friends in a quiet environment, do you have the capacity to follow and obey? Might be a little pain, might be a little bit of awkward conversation, but nothing too heavy. Next day, okay, what about when it's your whole department? What about when the stakes are higher? Okay, next day, what about it when it's the known world to them and you're on this public stage and the stakes are ultimate? Stated differently, I would say you can never achieve publicly what you have not conquered privately. As we look through the number of institutions, Christian institutions, non-Christian institutions, leaders, Christian and non-Christian, who have fallen, there's a dramatic disparity between who people are in private and who they are in public. And you can fake it for a little bit, but at some point your private life comes out, especially in today's world, the world of social media. What is done in private does come out. For us as Christians, we need God to transform our hearts and our inner life so that when and if we are put on this public stage, we're ready to glorify him. Number two, if you reject the gods of the culture, be ready for the culture to be against you. Expect it. Take courage. Set your mind at this. Past good deeds are not preventing them from being the object here. They're not preventing them from these group of Chaldeans from coming at them and trying to take their position. It doesn't matter how good they were, how much they blessed the community. Those are good things, and we should still do those. But we can't ever fool ourselves into thinking, well, if we just bless the community enough, then they'll love us. They will, right up until the point we refuse to bow down to their gods. Doesn't matter how much we've blessed the community at that point. When our story contradicts their story on what is ultimate and what is real in the world, everything is going to come unglued, which is exactly what happened here. Number three, make a stand, but make a stand where it counts. We like to stand on secondary issues, on third-level issues. We have frivolous debates that will end friendships over, and we need to be very cautious about doing that. We no longer have the luxury of fighting over non-essentials, particularly publicly, particularly outside the walls of the church. We have no luxury for this anymore. The hostages were accused of a couple of things. They pay no attention to you, they reject your gods, and they reject your command. The first accusation was false. They paid attention. They served the king well. They honored him with their lives. The second accusation, it was true. They weren't going to obey a command to worship a false god. But when we take stand after stand after stand on every issue, no matter how large or how trivial, there's kind of a fatigue that sets in. We lose our voice over the things that matter. Sometimes we need to let the secondary and the third issues, we need to let them go so that we can stay focused on the reason the world disagrees with us is they don't know Jesus. And until they know Jesus, why on earth would they agree with us? You could think of a family member or a friend who's not walking with God, and you want to fight them over the issues that the reasons why they're not walking with God. Why would they change those issues if they don't know Jesus? We fight them over the secondary and the third level issues, but if they don't know Jesus, those stands and positions don't make any sense. Finally, count the cost. God may deliver, but he may not deliver. His deliverance might look like putting you in the fire, but then protecting you. I loved how specific Daniel is all throughout this chapter, particularly in the saving scene. Their a hair on their head wasn't hurt. Their clothes weren't burnt. They didn't even smell like smoke. I'm from Texas. I love smoking meat. And one of both the benefits and the occupational hazards is the smell, the aroma of, smoked oak and mesquite. Some of you are getting hungry right now just thinking about it, right? And so you've made the meal and you can have 3 or 4 showers. It doesn't matter. You just have that smell on you for a bit. And so the next day you're hungry again and you smell that smell. And you're like, oh, I just need, you just have this 3 or 4 day buzz of I just need some smoked meats in my life. They didn't even smell like that. Sorry, that was just for free. We're told if you share with your friends, they're going to turn to Jesus. Yes, they might turn to Jesus, but maybe they'll cut you off. If you turn to Jesus, you take your marriage and turn it over to Jesus, he'll save your marriage. Maybe because you follow Jesus is exactly why your spouse will reject you. Turn your finances over to Jesus, you'll be successful. Maybe you'll be poor. Maybe he'll call you to a life of poverty if you turn your finances over to him. If you speak up, perhaps you'll be rescued. Maybe. Perhaps you'll be punished. We don't know. All we know is God has deputized us, and we're called to act in a certain way as his deputy. We're not promised the outcome. Let's pray this morning. Father, what a dramatic story you've given us in the lives of these young men who stood up for you, fully expecting to be thrown into the fire, and then they were, but something happened. There was a twist. You showed up. What did that fellowship look like? They never would have had it had they not been in the fire with you. They never would have had that experience. God, I pray that for all of the people in this room right now that are walking through a problem, a tragedy, a fight, a tense situation, I pray for all of those that you would be meeting them there in their moment of pain, that they would see you, that we would look to the cross and realize that you were there in our moments of pain where we go, look, though you slay me, yet I'll follow you, but we need to argue a little bit that God, you would show us yourself, the slain lamb. You have suffered, you have felt our pain. God, I pray for those who are in that moment of about to be thrown in the fire, or maybe just out of the fire going, what just happened? I pray that you would be there.